So we recently launched remote agent sandboxes on Depot. So about a month ago, we launched Claude Code sessions, which effectively allowed you to persist your Claude Code metadata and conversation up to Depot so that you could easily replay that, resume it, share it with your team, share it across environments. And using Claude Code ourselves internally at Depot, we quickly found out that there's still quite a few things missing. For example, when you're using something like Claude Code inside of GitHub Actions, effectively you have to start from zero every time. So even if you persist the conversation history, you still have to check out the code again, install all of your dependencies, set up the development environment for the agent to essentially pick up where it left off. It's a ton of wasted work. So we've brought remote agent sandboxes to Depot. Effectively what remote agent sandboxes are, looking at the launch blog post, is they are a fast booting container inside of Depot infrastructure that have 2 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of RAM. They typically boot up in less than 5 seconds, and they have persistent file systems. So each agent sandbox has its own file system that's automatically mounted with the code base and context of your project. So essentially an agent can pick up exactly where it left off across invocations. And then the other thing we do is we have top-level Git provider integrations. So your agents are automatically connected to your source code repos. They can check out code, they can commit changes, and they can open pull requests. And so it's one seamless environment for remote agents to operate in. And today we're launching effectively with remote Claude Code as the first agent that we support. Here is what that looks like in action. So once you've taken care of the prerequisites of connecting Depot to your Anthropic account, installing our new GitHub Code app so that agents can check out your source code from GitHub, you can now essentially use the Depot Claude command, which by default launches remote agent sandboxes now. Here we're inside of Depot's public docs repo. And so what we can do is essentially ask Claude to give us just a quick summary of this repository. So we can say we pass in a session ID, which is effectively, this is the sandbox ID that we'll use to pick up and resume different sandboxes. And we'll go Claude summary. We'll enter the repository as this. And we're just going to say branch main. What the repository and branch flags do for the Depot Claude command is when you initialize a new sandbox, we will pre-check out the repository at that branch so that the agent is already ready to work with the source code in the sandbox. And just for purposes of this demo, we're going to set the dangerously skip permissions flag in Claude so that we have access to all of the tools inside of the sandbox. And then we're just going to ask Claude, give me a summary of this repository and tell me who the top contributors are. And we fire this off. And what we see is the command immediately returns with a session ID, which is exactly what we named it, and then a link to go view that session inside of Depot. So if we go and open that, so here we see that our sandbox is now running. It started a few minutes ago, and now we're seeing the full session message to Claude Code. So we see inside of Depot that we see our prompt of, hey, Claude, give me a summary of this repository. Tell me who the top contributors are. And we start to see all of the messages back from Claude, as well as the tools it's using and things like that. So we can kind of scroll through here and see exactly what it did. So it was like, okay, I'll analyze this repository and identify top contributors. Claude Code internally uses a to-do list effectively to know when it's done. So here we log out all of the different to-do list items that Claude has. We see that the tool result was successful. We see that Claude wants to make use of git short log. So it wants to call out to the terminal to see just the different git log history. And we keep scrolling down. It marks that to-do as completed. And we go all the way down and we can start to see, okay, now it's calling git log, doing a pretty format to get the contributors, which is largely Jacob and myself, more so me than Jacob, which lines up when it comes to writing. And then we see, okay, here's the result. Claude tells us the full repository summary, what it focuses on, the top contributors being me and Jacob. And then at the top, we see that now the sandbox is idle. So now it's stopped running altogether. And this is one of the key things with our agent sandboxes is effectively when you kick off a sandbox and you give Claude Code a prompt, Claude goes and operates on that prompt. And when it's done, we automatically shut the sandbox off. We snapshot the file system. So then what you can do, if we pop back over to our terminal, we can actually resume this sandbox. So here we are back in our terminal. This was the original session that we started. What we're going to do now is not start a new session. We're just going to resume this one. So we pass a new flag called resume, and we want to resume that session by its ID, which was Claude summary. Again, we're going to set dangerously skip permissions so that we have full access to writing to all of the tools. And we're going to tell Claude, write a new temp file in the workspace called hello.txt and put inside of that file, this is a demo. And we're going to fire that off. And we get the sandbox has started, and we can go back into Depot at that same sandbox URL and go see Claude's result. So here we're back in that same sandbox. We see that the sandbox was resumed today. So essentially it started is when the sandbox was first created, and then we can continuously resume it after every invocation. And then down here at the bottom, we see our new prompt, which is write a new temp file in the workspace. Claude goes out and writes a file at hello.txt. The file was created successfully, and Claude tells us, yep, I did this as you expected. And so what's really cool about this persistent file systems is now the sandbox is shut down, and we can resume it again, and that file will be there. So if we go back to our terminal, we're back in our terminal. We can resume that same session, only now we're going to tell Claude, can you output the contents of the file at workspace/hello.txt that you wrote previously. Fire that off. That starts a new session. Pop back over into Depot. And here we see the sessions being resumed. We ask Claude, can you output the contents of this? Claude outputs it, and now we see the text of the file. This is a demo. And so this really highlights the persistent file system of agent sandboxes on Depot. Previously, if you were to go use Claude Code inside of something like GitHub Actions, it has no notion of its previous file system state. And the reason for this is because things like GitHub Actions, or really any CI provider in general, is ephemeral by default. So there's no persistent disk. There's no way to export all of the file system off and reload it in. And even if there was, it's extremely not performant. Here, essentially, we boot up Claude Code. We initialize the sandbox at whatever repository and branch that you want. Then we can do whatever we want on the file system inside of the sandbox. Or better put, Claude Code can do whatever it wants with the file system on the sandbox. And then those, whatever we do to the file system is automatically persisted across invocations of Claude Code in that sandbox. But we can also do a lot of really cool other stuff. So for example, we can clone a sandbox with Depot. So if we stop sharing our screen here, go back to our terminal. So we had created this sandbox called Claude Summary. We'd resumed it a couple times. We'd wrote some files to it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new sandbox. We'll call this Claude Summary Fork. And we're going to tell the Depot control plane that I actually want this to be forked from this other session. We do that by passing in this resume flag at the same time as the session ID. And so essentially what this tells the CLI is we want to create a new sandbox called Claude Summary Fork, but we want to use the file system state of this other session called Claude Summary. Then what we're going to do is we will skip our permissions checks so that we have access to all the tools for this demo. And we're just going to give it the same type of prompt. And we're going to say, you are now a new session forked from a previous one. But can you still check that the contents of workspace hello.txt is still, this is a demo. And we fire that off. And what we see is now we get a new session ID because we started a new sandbox called Claude Summary Fork. And if we go and open this inside of our browser, here we have a brand new session that's called Claude Summary Fork. It's a brand new sandbox because it was just started. And we see the entire previous session of the original session. So we have all of the conversation history between us and Claude Code from the previous session. But now we've told Claude, you're a new session, and I want you to check if workspace hello.txt is still, this is a demo. And so Claude goes and looks at that file path. We see that it checks, is this still, this is a demo? An interesting system reminder to Claude here. And Claude outputs, yes, the content of workspace hello.txt is still, this is a demo. So essentially what we've done here is created a new sandbox from an existing sandbox that has the exact same file system. Now what we can do is we can ask Claude to go and open a pull request with this new file. To do that, what we're going to do is we're going to resume this new forked session, and we're going to pass our usual permissions check, and we're going to ask Claude, can you create a new branch, let's say a new Git branch called Kyle Claude demo, switch to that branch and commit the new file hello.txt. Once you've done that, push your changes upstream and open a pull request on the repository. So now we're telling Claude, resume this session and let's check in that file and open a pull request. So we can now pop back into, so we're back in our original Claude Summary session. It's been resumed. We scroll up to the top of this really quick. We can see the new prompt we passed in. We see that our session was resumed. We see our new prompt that asks Claude to create a new branch called Claude demo, switch to it, commit the new file, and then open a pull request. Like we've seen before, we see Claude creates a to-do list of things it needs to do. It knows it needs to create the new branch, switch to it, add the file, commit the changes, create a pull request. And so what we see is Claude is essentially determining all of the different commit message styles, which is quite interesting. So we told Claude that it needs to create a new commit. And so it's trying to learn what's the commit message style of this repository. And then it is effectively adding the new file that we wrote and committing it to the new branch called Kyle Claude demo. And then if we scroll down here, we will see that Claude pushes those changes up and then opens a pull request that now lives at this URL. And so we can go open this pull request in this URL, just like this. And we see that Claude added a hello.txt file with demo content for testing purposes. can look at the files changed, and exactly like we said in the prompt, that file contains this is a demo. And so agent sandboxes on Depot come effectively pre-connected to your own Anthropic account, whether you're using a Max plan or you want to use an Anthropic API key, so that you're using your own Claude credits and tokens. And then the agents can be configured to connect directly to your Git provider. So the sandboxes spin up, they're directly connected to your Git provider so they can check out code, commit changes, open pull requests, and do really fun workflows like this.